Hi there. Welcome to Pisay Talks and Webinars, a forum series being hosted by Philippine Science High School National Alumni Association, featuring alumni of Philippine Science High School in various disciplines who will share the work that they do and how they are able to increase the awareness on science and technology to society at large. I'm Chippy Buenafe, batch 1997 from Main Campus, and I will be your host for this pilot episode entitled Thy Light Our Beacon Be, Science and Technology and Pisay Alumni in the Time of the Pandemic. And we have a pretty loaded lineup for our pilot episode today. Our first guest, Dr. Fortunato de la Peña, is the Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology, or DOST, where he served in various capacities, including as Undersecretary for Scientific and Technological Services. SecBoy is also an honorary member of the Philippine Science High School Alumni Association. SecBoy, welcome.
Well, I'm very happy to be here with you in this program to share with you whatever insights I can.
Great. Our next guest, Dr. Eric Domingo, is the current Undersecretary for the Department of Health and Director General for the Food and Drug Administration. He held the positions of Director and Deputy Director for Administration for the Philippine General Hospital. Doc Eric is a graduate of Philippine Science High School, Main Campus, batch 1985. Doc Eric, welcome.
Hi, Chippy. Thank you for having me, and hi, everybody.
Great. And finally, our last guest, Dr. Edsel Marie Salvania, is an Associate Professor of Medicine at the Philippine General Hospital and is the current Director of the Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology at the National Institutes of Health. Doc Ed is also a graduate of Philippine Science High School Main Campus, this time from batch 1992. Doc Ed, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chippy. Welcome, and thank you for having us.
Okay, so let's begin. Well, let's start off with SecBoy. SecBoy, could you give us a quick overview of how DOST has participated in the fight against COVID-19?
Well, actually, as what I do during our weekly report, I run through what we call the 4Ks. Okay, so what we have done in the area of Kalusugan, what we have done in the area of Kabuhayan, what we have done in the area of Kaayusan, and what we have done in the area of Kinabukasan. So I always organize our DOST report in that manner. And of course, we at DOST are, shall we say, proud to say that many of the responses that we have actually given have actually been done in the past, not necessarily just during this first quarter of second quarter of 2020. For example, the work on diagnostic kit, actually the platform has been there since the diagnostic kits for dengue and leptospirosis were done. Our disease modeling has been there since we had to model also dengue and measles and typhoid fever. And in fact, the work on ventilator, although we have not yet been successful in coming up with a fully working ventilator, has been done more than a year before the COVID-19. Now, we are also happy that in some cases, actually, in these instances, we just respond to certain requests. For example, when DOH told us that they would like to have a specimen collection booth that will protect our health workers. They gave us a list of 132 hospitals. We immediately responded by calling our startups. Okay, whom we have been helping, to see who can give us the best design immediately. And with the help of our two councils, the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development and the Philippine Council for Industry and Energy Research and Development, we quickly developed, manufactured, and delivered the 132 specimen collection booth. Okay, Then there are, of course, demands for clinical trials for therapeutics and more recently on vaccines. And we have to respond to that also. But of course, we cannot just say yes to anybody who comes over and say we have a cure and please do a clinical trial, because there are protocols that we follow at DOST, at the PCHRD. You have to show certain things to us and you have to come up with a proposal. Now, so that's what we have done in the case of our clinical trials for some natural products like BCO, or some therapeutics that are actually being used for other purposes, like the recently approved study on melatonin, and of course the WHO solidarity trials. And then, of course, the president challenged us regarding how we can help in the area of vaccines, and in the area, well, I did mention ventilators already, and so we have to work double time on that. With respect to vaccines, our first, shall we say, response was to talk to countries where we have bilateral agreements on science and technology, because we think it will be easier to negotiate if we have existing agreements. And that's what we did, and came up with 5 candidates coming from 2 neighboring economies. And the IATF approved our recommendation to negotiate for this. Of course, we have our own conditions. Even if we are the requesting party, we would like these potential partners or collaborators to ensure that we will have the vaccines here. And one of them is the possibility of having licensed manufacturers in the Philippines, Philippine companies. Now, and then after a few days, the WHO already announced that they will have the solidarity trials for vaccine. In fact, the meeting, I think, will be tomorrow, where because initially they came up with a long list, and I was just telling our co-workers at DOST that if we have to participate in all of those long list of vaccines, and we have to spend for each of these, we will require a big budget. So I am hoping that WHO will come up with a shorter list, because I think if we have to participate, we have to join, or we have to try all the vaccines. Now, the good thing about joining the solidarity trials is that WHO will come up with the required population, human population who will be given the vaccines faster than if just one country will do the clinical trials. And so we have been preparing for that. And from time to time, regularly, we update the IATF on these developments. So far, the latest approval that they gave us is we can join the WHO solidarity trials for vaccines. Yes, they approved, okay, but did not specify when and when we can get the budget for it. And the last one was a permission for us to create a separate expert panel just to deal with our pharmaceutical companies interested to manufacture. So these are the kinds of challenges that we have. But in the area of kabuhayan, we have to do also some work, because as we know, millions of Filipinos have lost jobs. Hundreds of thousands of OFWs want to come home or have come home already, and we are thinking of how we can help. So we just opened a program, although the target coverage is so small yet compared to the potential coverage, and this is the IFWD PH program. FWD stands for Filipinos Working Distantly from the Philippines, so we just call it I-Forward, where we have developed a a program which will be in 2 phases for OFWs who want to get started with a technology-based micro enterprise. So I want to emphasize that it should be a technology-based micro enterprise. In other words, we can only handle the micro enterprises right now. And then we are also helping, well, we are trying to extend our assistance to the local government units who are expecting, let us say, an increase in level, well, in terms of population and in terms of economic activity through the model that we commissioned the Planades Foundation, which is the foundation of the school and urban and regional planning. Again, this is one instance where we never expected that it will be of use in an environment like ours now, but the model actually is to me a good one because it identified the drivers of growth for the newly developing growth centers, and some recommendations with respect to certain shall we say strategic areas like in industrial development, infrastructure, and transportation. So on Thursday, June 25, we will have a briefing for at least 20 governors who were identified as the top in terms of grading them in terms of new growth centers. And lastly, I think some of you have heard in the early months of the quarantine that we were challenged. DOST was asked to come up with some technology solutions to the long queues in the checkpoints. You know, while the queues were not completely, shall we say, avoided, at least it put some order. So again, to the help of our collaborators from the private sector, mostly driven by startup, shall we say, geeks, you know, we were able to implement the Rapid Pass program, which is a QR-based system, and eventually turned it over to DICT and to PNP. So the challenge is really to respond quickly, no, because everything is urgently needed. Okay, and I'm happy that at least we have our researchers who are ready to do their share, and actually there are more and more challenges coming. Today there are challenges pertaining to mental health, and again we are trying to do this. So in sum, I think we are more busy now than before. But I am happy that our scientists and researchers are also responding in a very positive way.
Wow, you've actually presented a very broad spectrum of initiatives, activities. At the same time, you are also sharing with us the issues, the difficulties, the challenges that each of these initiatives would be faced with. Maybe if I were to ask you a very bold question, so to speak, what would you think would be the biggest obstacle or challenge that DOST has faced in the last few months? Was it money? Was it technological maturity? Was it process? What was the biggest hurdle?
Well, for example, if you do work in the area of clinical trials, you cannot compress time very much. You really have to wait. You have to enroll patients, and you have to deliver the therapies over a certain period of time. Sometimes I'm pressured because, you know, the media calls you almost every day. Oh, how is your clinical trial on this? And I can only say it's ongoing. We are still waiting for enrolled patients so that we can complete the desired number. Well, okay. Naintindihan naman ng media if you explain. There is one area which I have not explained, but you will know more about that maybe in another session where more authoritative people can speak. And I'm referring to the system of learning delivery, teaching learning delivery that we are anticipating for the next coming school year.
Yeah, that's
Very
actually,
much involved of Philippine Science High School.
yeah, great, great. It's good that to know that Philippine science is actually able to influence and come up with ways on how to shape the next normal, so to speak, when it comes to delivering education to people. And in a way, so the biggest challenge that USEC Boy and the DOST has faced in particular was really managing the expectations of everybody else and how
Yes.
to make sure that everything that we're doing, okay, is somewhat rigorous, still above board, and still within scientific soundness, so to speak. Um, I'd like to use this opportunity to ask Doc Eric, since we're talking about clinical trials and vaccine. Doc Eric, we know that the vaccine is still currently in development. Maybe can you give us an idea on how much work is required in doing a vaccine, especially for a novel virus or disease such as COVID-19?
Oh, yes, Chippy, no, if, like what Sec Boy says, everybody's so impatient. They ask us every day, is there any new news on the vaccine, on this drug, on the trials on virgin coconut oil that DOST is doing? But these things take a lot of time and a lot of money. No? The FDA, our mandate is to make sure that health products are available in the country. These are drugs, food, medical devices, and including vaccines. But we have to make sure also that they are safe and they're actually effective. So before you develop a vaccine or a medicine that is effective, safe and effective, that will cost you millions of dollars, billions of dollars. No? Yung vaccine, a regular vaccine would take about maybe 5, 6, 7 years to develop. So if we have a coronavirus vaccine this year or even early next year, this is probably the fastest developed virus vaccine ever. And it's because the whole world's working together. Because we have a WHO solidarity trial, so many countries participating, and everybody working together. But we should not discount the amount of work that our scientists are doing for this. At this time, we have about maybe 140 candidate vaccines. So this means thousands of scientists in different universities and different laboratories working together. We'd be very, very lucky, and siguro Edsel and I would be very happy if 7 or 8 of those become actual vaccines that will boost. Yung 120 dyan gagastos pero hindi magpa-pan out yan. Kasi ang hirap-hirap, i-develop mo muna yung vaccine, the material that you're going to use to induce that immune response. Second, you're going to have a lot of preclinical studies. You have to find the vehicle that will work with it, that will make it stable, that will make it transportable, that will make it something that can be used in any country in the world, for example. And then you're going to do phase 1 clinical trials. Meaning you're going to try it on healthy humans who are not even exposed to the disease. No? Talagang check mo muna kung ako walang sakit, malusog, hindi naman ako exposed, wala ba mangyayari sa akin. So once you've shown that, then you expand to a clinical trial, a limited one, a phase 2. Hindi ka pa rin hindi ka pa rin lahat ng tao. Pipili ka pa rin ng medyo malusog, na feeling mo kahit na magkasakit, kakayanin yan, and then you expose them to the community and see if they have any response to it. And then after that, you go to a phase 3 clinical trial, which is a wider clinical trial. Siguro 3,000, 4,000 patients. And then you have to go through time. Kasi it's not like we're going to give you a vaccine and then I'm going to have somebody with COVID cough on you. We're going to put you in a real world setting and see if you get exposed in this community or not in that community, if there's a difference, or if you develop the antibodies. So this will take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And each and every step, it has to be done very, very meticulously and very scientifically. Even at the end, pagdating na sa FDA na i-register na nila, i-review na naman namin lahat yan. Titingnan natin na naman kung lahat ng methods tama yung ginawa, kung stable talaga yan. So kahit na safe siya at effective siya, kung ginawa ba siya, for example, sa Switzerland, will it travel well? When it comes here, is it going to retain that same potency? We're going to need proof of all of that until we allow it for use to the general public. So it's going to take quite a lot of effort. But with the whole world working together, then that's the hope that we have here. that maybe we can compress that 6 or 7 years into 1 year. Yung 2 years, masayang-masaya na ako dun eh. But of course, everybody's hoping for 6 months to 1 year. And if that happens, that will be a modern, this is a modern miracle. This is having the whole world, all of the scientists working together to come up with a solution to a particular problem.
And I think it's a very curious thing that the model, so to speak, of developing a vaccine, you have the entire world globally having a consolidated effort to actually come up with a vaccine as quickly as possible. Do you foresee this as the way of how vaccines will be developed sometime in the future? Or is it just because, coronavirus, pandemic, the sense of urgency just shot up, so that's why everybody in the world has been like pouring all of their resources and focusing their efforts into this singular particular thing, right?
Not just vaccines or medicines, but public health in general we have been changed completely. No, we now know how easy disease can travel from one country to another. This is unprecedented. This has never happened in our lifetime. Kahit kami ni Sekboy na medyo mas may edad na sa inyo, ngayon lang kami nakakita ng ganito. No? This has never happened before. And we foresee that it's something that will happen again. Maybe every 10, 20 years it can happen again. And we're going to have to change the way that we develop medicines, the way that we share technology, the way that we build our health systems, the way that we respond to medical emergencies. It's going to, after this, it's going to be a heyday for researchers because there's so much that we're going to have to change and we're going to need the knowledge to do that.
Wow. Well, speaking of all public health issues, no, I'll probably use this as a segue to ask Doc Ed. No, I mean, Doc Ed, like many others, you've been at the front lines in treating those who have been afflicted by the disease. Okay, and therefore you have like a courtside perspective, so to speak, of public health in this regard. After 3 months, what do you think, or what do you think we've learned so far about this disease?
Yeah. I think that we've seen a lot. I think we've seen a lot of new things. We keep getting surprised by what this virus has really been doing. First WHO was saying no masks, and now it's masks. And then everything changes. Like we were supposed to put people on the ventilator early, and now we're supposed to delay. So this virus has really challenged scientists all over the world. And we continue to learn, and the world is really focused on trying to learn as much as we can. And actually, our Filipino doctors have gotten much, much better at treating this. You can see that the mortality rate has really gone down. And what was really essential was that we protected our healthcare system. This was the driving force behind the lockdowns, because you saw early on in March, our hospitals were really starting to get overwhelmed. And if your healthcare system gets overwhelmed, wala kang laban. Hindi mo lang man ma-admit yung pasyente eh. In the US, you're seeing 4 people attached to one ventilator. I mean, that's incredibly bad if we have to get to that. Hindi pa naman tayo umabot sa ganon. But it was close, and so I think the lockdown just came on time. Dahan-dahan ngayon, we're starting to see a surge in Cebu, and that's a little scary. But we've been able to do it in Manila. Hopefully, we can do it in Cebu as well. My role has actually been, aside from being a frontliner and then being quarantined early, because 2 of the first deaths were some of my patients, and then I got sick. Buti na lang it was negative. Then in NIH, we were one of the first subnational laboratories that helped DOH, and so we had to transform yung kay Sekboy na mga equipment na binigay through DOST grants. We've actually repurposed a lot of those, and ended up we had a BSL-free facility that actually became a testing facility and continues to be a testing facility. So that's really helped. I've seen the lab aspect. We're doing some genomics work as well, so that we know where these viruses are coming from. And it's very interesting that looking at the genomics work, there was one of the viruses at least came by way of China, and then it went to Japan, then it went to India, and then it went to us. So that kind of data is very useful in trying to figure out whether we had multiple introductions, which we really suspect because people are coming from everywhere. And then the last role I've really seen, and this is where I've worked with Sec Boy and also you Sec Eric, is I was asked to be on the technical advisory group of the Department of Health, which really is helping give science-based advice to the IATF. And I've actually been very, very happy that the IATF has really listened to the science. You can see naman, like for instance, in the United States, they have the best scientists. I was trained by infectious disease doctors in the United States, and I can tell you they're much smarter than me. And yet, you see what's happening in the United States: 120,000 deaths, over 2 million cases. And so it's not just having the right scientists. You do want to have the correct science, but you also want to make sure that the science is heard. And that's where scientists really need to have a voice and a place at the table so that we can influence the way that government does its policies. And you look at the US, where the scientists, the smartest people, the CDC, which is the premier public health institution in the world, is there. But because the government did not listen and did not give us much, attention compared to what our IATS and the government has done, we kept it at under 1,000 deaths during the lockdown period, and the US has more than 100,000. I think those results speak for itself, and also the fact that science really needs to have a voice at the table, especially in times of public health emergency.
Yeah. Maybe you guys have been really in the front line, Doc Ed, right? I mean, at this stage, how are you guys feeling right now? How's the mood? How's the atmosphere of all of our doctors currently right now fighting against this this disease that has really sieged the entire planet?
I think we're still all scared. I mean, but there's less. We know more about the virus, and we know how to protect ourselves. We know that wearing a mask decreases your risk of transmission by 85%. Physical distancing decreases the risk by about 80%, and the face shields by about 78%. So we know more about this virus. We're able to protect ourselves. We also hope that the public does the same, because these are things that cannot be just done by government, cannot just be done by the medical community, because the host of the virus is people. And so if we need to all work together, government, academe, Pisay Alumni, and of course the general public. We know what works from a science standpoint. At least we're not having that kind of debate like in the US. They think that having to wear a mask is a problem with freedom or social issues. It's a medical issue. And I think from a Philippine standpoint, at least yun, science-based tayo, hindi tayo nakikipag-away sa mga tao na gumamit ng mask. So I think that we've learned a lot. We're still learning more. But from a frontline standpoint, I know Cebu is scary, and a lot of the doctors stuck in the COVID wards, they're pulling 8-hour shifts in really hot PPE. It's very, very difficult. But we also have the tools to protect ourselves. And I'm really hoping and praying that we apply the lessons we learned in Manila to Cebu, so that Cebu can get back down to a lower level of quarantine, and that their hospital system is able to cope.
Yeah, and our prayers go out to all of our doctors, nurses, those who are really in the front lines, really trying to curb and fight against this disease. Okay. Well, let's take a little bit of a step back, okay? Because the episode talks about contributions of the alumni of Philippine Science High School. Well, Doc Eric, Doc Ed, both of you are alumni of Philippine Science High School. So why don't we try to make a very long, maybe indirect connection here? How much has your formative years in Pisay prepared both of you for this current crisis? Would like to go first?
Doc Eric. I'm older. I'll go first. Now, I think, in my everyday life, ever since I graduated from school, I've been guided by the scientific method. I mean, learning that method and knowing how to think, how to analyze things, how to frame things in the right context, it will guide you your whole life. It helped me through med school. I studied clinical epidemiology, it made me go through that. And now every time that I look at any data, any information, or any products that being sent to my office for regulation, asking for a license, there's only one way to think, and that's a scientific way of thinking, and it has definitely molded me, and I don't think I have any other way of thinking until until the last day. It grows with you, and we will always be able to use that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's very very important to have that kind of foundation. Even from a high school standpoint, where you question everything. You make sure that you have data to back it up. Kasi sa pizza, if you're gonna say something tapos back it up, patay ka talaga. And, people are gonna review about it. And the network is also very, very interesting. Like si Yusek Eric and a lot of people, even in the IITF, Secretary June Esperon is class 69. So medyo nakakagulat because, then they'll mention that out of the blue, and you're gonna say, hey, yeah, so I mean, may connection tayo, and we're here, we're trying to do our best to help the country. I think it's really great. Aside from teaching us how to think, is also having a group of like-minded people that you can almost instantly connect with when it comes to talking about helping the country.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned about General Esperon as well, right? And I'm sure both of you have experienced working with more fellow alumni in your respective areas. Knowing that they came from Pisay, have you considered it as an advantage?
Always, yeah. When you get to these cabinet meetings, there's so many there. Si Gev, for example, with the DOST, kay Secboy, nandyan yan. Yung magkaintindihan kayo agad yan. Si Carlo Nograles, na cabinet secretary, is also an alumno. Si June Esperon. And then there are a lot of other undersecretaries. We have undersecretaries in NEDA, for example, and in other departments. And when you get together and when you talk, you have some common may common frame kayo na madali kayong mag-communicate with. But it's the same way, even for example in my clinical practice. Parang siyempre magre-refer ka lagi doon sa medyo kampante ka eh. So kapag ang unang-unang re-referan mo, hahanapin mo somebody who went to med school with you, no? In the case of EDSL-NI, UP College of Medicine. Pero pag tiga yung UP College of Medicine at tiga Pisay pa, double bonus na yun, siguradong doon ka na magre-refer. Kasi you know how they think, and you know that you will, there's a way that you will be able to communicate with each other for the benefit of the patient.
Yeah, and I think it's really important also, since we were scholars from a very early age, yung utang na loob to the country, I think that's very, very important na you really feel like you have an obligation to the Filipino people, so you're not allowed to mess up. Or if you mess up, you really have to make up for it. So I think that's a very good mindset, kagaya nga nung sabi ni Yusek Eric, na when you talk to someone who's from Pisay, you know where they're coming from, you know what their values are. And so mas kampante ka talaga na mag-entrust ng patient, or if you're working together for the country, I think it's very, very nice to understand that, these are people na may hugot talaga, merong tinitingnan na utang sa sambayanan. To the people who sent us to school, we're some ni Yusek Eric kasi aside from Pisay, tapos UP pa, tapos UP College of Medicine pa. So alam mo yon, it's really there, and so you're really obligated, in my mind, to give back as much as you can and more.
Yeah. I mean, just as a matter of curiosity, I mean, both of you are medical doctors. Have you thought of becoming medical doctors when you were still in Pisay?
Nung panahon namin, bawal pa actually. Hindi pa ako papayagan ni Secboy noon kung sinabi ko na magme-medicine ako eh. Nasa banned list pa yon. Kaya lang bagong-bago kasi yung intermed noon. And it was just so interesting, you do it in 7 years, that I actually applied for it. No, but like I think like what Ed said, you're just always so thankful that the government has been there for you, and then you're in a meeting with the Secretary of the DOST. Parang mahihiya ka naman na pinag-aral ka nila, ginastosan ka nila, and then you don't do your part. I think it's ingrained in all of us na kailangan mo nga malaking utang na loob natin, and you just have to keep on repaying.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, I did qualify for intermed, but it scared me kasi 23.5 units ata yung first sem. So I actually ended up going to Diliman, which is a good thing because that's where I met my wife. And then we both went to medicine. Okay. And then because the issue for me was, I had this idea that I wanted to be a scientist. And then my wife, who happens to be the daughter of national scientist Ernesto Domingo. Nakita nyo naman na he's both a scientist and a doctor. So when I saw that, I said, well, pwede naman pala. So that's why I decided to proceed with medicine, and I did what I set out to do. I became a scientist and a doctor.
Wow. Okay, well, it's great that we had different trajectories. Initially, I was thinking of becoming a medical doctor when I was interviewed as an incoming freshman, but I ended up being an information technology guy. So yeah, I mean, it was just a matter of curiosity. Well, going back to SecBoy, I know that one of your thrusts as DOST secretary is the Balik Scientist program. Maybe for the benefit of those who are tuned in to this program, if you can give us a little bit of description about the Balik Scientist program, and how has been your experience so far about this program since you took the reins of DOST?
Well, actually, the Balik Scientist program started 45 years ago. It was actually envisioned to convince some of our successful Filipino scientists, expatriates abroad, to render some kind of giving back service, even for a brief stay in the Philippines. However, the program was not institutionalized really. So in other words, it does not even get a regular budget. So DOST just sets aside a certain amount that is earmarked for this program. And definitely there were many, shall we say, a lot of room for improvement of the program. Like some people want to come here, and yet they have to go through so many bureaucratic procedures, that I'm sure Dr. Edsel has probably experienced that before. There are so many limitations, and so we thought that since we have seen how Balik scientists have been able to help to institutionalize it with certain improvements, with more, shall we say, options available, and at the same time that we will be assured that they will be able to contribute something even if they stay here for a short time. So the Balik Scientist bill was presented to Congress. It became a law in June of 2018. And on that basis, we targeted a significant increase in the numbers. Like if we had 40 in the previous years, so we would like to at least increase 50% every year for the succeeding 3 years, and then maybe level up with 20% increases. And that was happening already until in 2020, all of a sudden, travel became difficult, so that some of those that have indicated they would want to come has to postpone, okay? So we may be getting more during the last quarter, hopefully, of the year. But I think what is more important is that in the setup now, wherein we ask our R&D councils to manage the Balik scientists, then they are able to determine in what areas we need Balik scientists, and then even not only the sector, but also the geographical area where we have a need for, let us say, improvements in the science and technology infrastructure. So since then, I think there has been a lot of institutions that have benefited from their services. And what is more interesting is that there are more and more who have opted to repatriate themselves here. I think Dr. Edsel could be cited as an example, but recently there's an increasing number. They usually start by getting a short-term engagement. Actually, for 15 days, you can already be a Balik scientist, okay? Or you can go for a medium term between 6 months to 1 year, or you can go for more than 2 years. But there are some who opt to stay already. So, for example, in the Visayas, in Iloilo, we have a couple there who opted to stay, and they're now spearheading the pharmaceutical research in the university where they are. And we have others who are in the field of engineering, like someone who worked with our satellite programs, and then ultimately he applied for a position at the University of the Philippines in Mindanao, where he was given a position. So the another young guy who I think our two doctors here know, also an alumnus of the UP College of Medicine, maybe also, I'm not sure whether he is from Pisay, but Raymond Fernandez Sarmiento has been involved in this disease modeling project that we have, and I think he is here on a longer term basis. So I think that this is a good program. There are added incentives, by the way. So there is now a lump sum that you can get at the end of your engagement. Nawala na panahon pa rin na Excel. So I am very hopeful that tsaka parang ang daming gustong mag-serve, no? Kung kaya din lang. Now we have even more very senior people who have gone past their their 60s and their 70s who want to help. Like when we announced that we will have a virology program, naku, we saw a number of names who wanted to come.
Wow, wow. Well, Doc Edsel, I mean, as Secboy mentioned, you were actually a beneficiary of the Balik Scientist program. What are your thoughts about the program, and how has it helped you personally from a career perspective?
Yeah, well, I was pretty committed to going home after my training in the U.S. I was there for 6 years. I did internal medicine, then infectious diseases, and it was interesting because I had already communicated to then Dr. Belisario, who was at that time the deputy executive director of the NIH. And before I left, I actually asked him for a letter of recommendation, and I told him that I was going to be back. And he told me, Edsel, do you know how many times I've heard that before? That somebody will come back. And so when I came back, I said, sir, I'm back. I need a job. And the Balik Scientist really did facilitate that. So it really came very well. As Secboy has said, there were some bureaucratic issues and everything. But, if you really want to go home, it's those things are... Those things can be, you can get over them. You just have magtsatsaga lang. And I actually also got my first grant as part of the Balik Scientists program through the NASD. So it really helped me put myself on my feet. And aside from doing science, I'm also a doctor, so I did have some practice. Unfortunately, this is why I think a lot of the basic scientists really need a lot of support because they're giving up a lot of money. For us clinician scientists, we have the option to practice, and so you still have a way of making a good living aside from what the university is giving. Although the university has been much more generous nowadays, so I think it looks much better. We really need what we call a critical mass of scientists back in the Philippines, and I'm glad there's a lot of interest. And I think the Balik Scientist program has a big role to play in getting this critical mass because science is so essential in the development of a nation, and we really have to accelerate that. Lalo na ngayon, kitang-kita natin that science really needs to be at the forefront of our responses because everything else follows from that. If our public health response is not science-based, we'll end up with the US, we'll end up with Brazil, and then we can't do anything but sakang economy. So it's very, very important that we get back as many scientists as we can and that we let science inform the response, and that scientists themselves need to be involved, need to find their voice, not just, yung naghihintay ka na tanungin ka. You have to go to the front of the table and say, this is really dangerous. This is what we have to do. I hope we can work together. And I think that's part of the reason why we really need a new breed of scientists, not just scientists who generate data, but also scientists who are willing to put their data out there and say that, this is probably the best thing that we can do and we need to save lives by doing this. And I think that that's what we really, really need right now, science-based policies and scientists who are willing to get down and dirty and make sure that we're doing the best we can from a science-based perspective.
Okay, well, before we close, what would you like to say to those who are interested to pursue a career or a vocation in science and technology, especially the youth of today? Maybe let's start with you, Doc Ed.
Yeah, I think that science has really shown us now, that it's it's essential. It's not even just kind of like a luxury now. Okay, we have a science program, that's good. We have basic science. The fact that the world has shut down because of a microscopic virus already tells you that we need science-based solutions for all this, and everything else will come from that. And so, as for me, I'm an infectious disease doctor. This is what I trained for. I hoped it would never happen, but it happened. We knew that something like this could happen, and as you said, Erica says, this can happen again. And so we need people to be the ones where, if there's an outbreak, most people run away. We're the ones who run towards the outbreak. So we need more crazy people to do that, because we need to find solutions to these things. And in the end, it's what really matters, because everything else will come out from it. If we don't solve the problem with the virus, then we can't get back to our way of life from before. It's probably never going to go back to the way it was before, but at least recover some form of normalcy, and be able to do the things that we used to do. At least travel and not be scared about dying and being stuck in a ventilator. So I think science-based careers are more than ever needed right now. And we really need people to get into Pisay and to do things. I'm fortunate my kid just got into Pisay, so hopefully he stays in. It's really hard, but that's what it takes. We need people. We need Filipino scientists who will continue to make sure that the Philippines gets better and better, and make sure that our policies are science-based.
Doc Eric, do you have any words of encouragement to those who are
For the
interested?
young people there, when you think science and technology career, don't be scared, no? Or don't be, don't close your minds. It can be as exciting as you want it to be. There's so many different ways that you can do. In the healthcare field alone, you can be a clinician, you can be someone trying out new treatments, new surgeries. You can also be in the pharmaceutical industry, developing a new drug or developing a new vaccine that will save the world. That can help you. You can continuously do research in all sides of the healthcare spectrum, even in public health, so that you have scientific basis on how to design a public health system that will be responsive to emergencies in the future. This is something that you can do. And even what I'm doing now, the regulatory sciences is something that is in a very infantile stage in our country. We need scientists who will know how to set standards of safety, efficacy, and effectiveness for so many things, for food, for drugs, for devices. We need engineers, we need radiation physicists, we need gravitational physicists, we need pharmacists, chemists. Everybody's here, and you can find an exciting niche somewhere there, as long as you're willing to look and just don't think that you're going to end up in a laboratory doing something the same every day. Believe us, it's never the same every day. There's always something new.
That's true. Well, Sec Boy, any fiery words as well?
Well, I have some advice not only to the young people but also to the parents, that if their children show some interest in science and technology and talent for it, do not discourage them. They need all the support that they need. And for those who have the talent, the inclination, maybe you can also try to examine yourself. I still remember the, how do you call it, the virtues that are being always proclaimed at Pisay, and these are excellence and truth and service. Check yourself if you are of course, committed to all of this, and go ahead. As Doc Eric says, it is always different every day. There is always something interesting that you can do. As Doc Edsel said, it doesn't mean always that you will be poor. there are some scientists who get also financially rewarded, But I think just go ahead and try to think of contributing. I myself did not go to Philippine Science High School. I always thank the National Alumni Association for giving me an honorary membership. But I always defend myself by saying that when Philippine Science High School started, I was already in UP Diliman. So that, that is my excuse for not being at Pisay. I don't know whether I will qualify if there was already a Pisay in my time. But anyway, I'm so proud to be in the company of very, shall we say, illustrious scientists and public servants in person of Doc Eric here and Doc Edsel. And I thank the organizers for putting me at this session. And I'm honored to be with them.
Mm. Well, gentlemen, you've really shared a lot of stuff for today's show. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So thank you, Sec Boy, Doc Eric, Doc Ed, for spending your time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Edsel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sekboy.
And thank you to STII for helping us with this.
If you are a Pisay alumnus or alumna, go to pshsnaa.org for activation of your membership. I repeat, that's pshsnaa.org. This has been the Pisay Talks and Webinars, organized by the Philippine Science High School National Alumni Association. Once again, I'm Chippy Buenafe, Main Campus, Batch 1997, and thanks for tuning in.